On this edition of EDR Tech, we're going to be discussing the Toyota Techstream software program and how it can be used to access Toyota vehicle control history data, which is different from the traditional EDR crash data obtained with the Bosch CDR tool. One thing of note, Crash Data Group does not sell Toyota Techstream or provide any support related to its use. However, data obtained from the Toyota vehicle control history as accessed by Techstream can complement EDR crash data as part of your crash investigation. This video will provide you with some information on this topic to help you better understand Toyota Techstream. Now joining me today is David Hallman of Hallman Engineering. David has been in the accident reconstruction industry for nearly 30 years and is an expert on, amongst many things, Toyota Techstream and its application to traffic accident investigation. David has extensive knowledge on Techstream and has published various articles on the use of Techstream, and we're excited to have him with us today. All right, well, David, thank you for joining us here. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and meet with us today and help talk about Toyota Techstream. And for our viewers that may not have even heard of Techstream or know very little about it, why don't you start off, what is Techstream?
Techstream is basically Toyota software that they use to diagnose their cars in the dealerships, right? And so it's what they use to do all of their background work. And so it's for repair. It's a software that's designed for using for vehicle repair, so that they can look at codes, they can look at troubleshooting, they can look at all the systems on the vehicle through the DLC, the same DLC that we use.
Okay, and so this was developed primarily for the automotive service industry, right? The repair industry. That's what it was developed for. Is that the primary industry that uses Techstream?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically Toyota's software. So the dealerships use the software, but they also allow you to purchase a license to use it, I mean, for aftermarket shops or whoever wants to, or us. But yeah, basically it's a software designed to help with vehicle repair.
Okay, but there are systems that you can access using Techstream that are beneficial to what we do, traffic accident investigation and reconstruction. What systems are out there that Techstream can access that maybe otherwise you couldn't get to?
Well, the big one for us is vehicle control history, which is basically there's a lot of different information that is stored from various triggers that Toyota stores in the airbag control module. So that data is collected in the background and stored. But there's a wide variety of things that we're going to get into today as far as triggers and different things that can actually cause that data to be stored. So it's useful because you'll get things like throttle opening, vehicle speed, cruise control on or off, brake application, a lot of what we get in EDR plus a lot of additional information. But you can get it not only the 5 seconds near the crash, but way prior to the crash, or even days and weeks prior to that. So one of the examples we'll look at today, it's a 2015 that I imaged on the 28th of October of 2022 that has events all the way back to 2014.
Okay. What about video images? I've heard possibly, does Techstream video or images or pictures, anything like that? What are you aware of with Techstream's ability to access video images?
You actually can, in some very late model vehicles, get video images as well. That is documented in the Toyota Information System, which is basically their electronic database that tells you what's where in the car, and it tells you what cars record what. And so there are some images that can be downloaded as well using the Techstream software.
Oh, interesting. What about support or coverage? What models are supported using Techstream, or at least with the data that we're going to use or would be useful to us? How far back does the coverage go? And is it all Toyota vehicles?
The vehicle control history, which is specifically what I'm using the Techstream information, and what most people that do recon are using it for, is started with the Toyota RAV4 in 2013. In 2014, they added the Highlander. And then after that, they've been adding vehicles kind of ever since. There is a list of those, which we'll put up on the screen, and you'll be able to see the current list of what we have that's covered. The bulk of the vehicles that Toyota makes are now covered but it's a matter of which model years started coverage when. So it was RAV4s, Highlanders, I believe Camrys were next, and then there's another variety. Now, pretty much the bulk of Toyota and Lexus vehicles as well are covered for new models, but you'd have to look at the list to see if the one you're specifically looking at has the ability or not.
All right, and with Bosch CDR, the EDR data coverage goes back to kind of early 2000 model years. You wouldn't expect to be able to get anything prior to when you couldn't get EDR crash data from the Bosch tool, anything prior to that as far as coverage goes. You're not aware of anything going that far back as far as Techstream coverage?
No, 2013s is as far back. I mean, granted, there may be stuff in the Techstream. I mean, you can get code, engine codes, things like that, if that sort of thing is useful for your particular case. But as far as the vehicle control history, which is, the triggered data that Toyota is collecting, 2013 RAV4 is the first vehicle that had that for Toyotas.
Okay, great. Using Techstream, we often get asked with all the EDR tools and whatnot, the report that you get, and that how is the Techstream data using Techstream software? How is the information saved? Do you get a report, or do you have to do screenshots? How do you save the information that you retrieve using this equipment?
Well, when you actually go in to do the image, the vehicle control history image, if you do it in the native, you're obviously going to pull it in the native the software in its native format. It's very user-friendly at that point because you can go through, look at individual events. You can see a variety of information that way. So that's the way you'll have to collect it, is using the Techstream software. At least at this point, I haven't heard of anybody doing anything else or using anything else. Once you've collected it in that software, you can export it into a CSV file and look at it in Excel. The CSV file is a little bit more clunky just because it's just the raw data. But you can, if you want to do analysis or something like that, and that's what you're more comfortable with, that is a possibility, or if you need to pass the data along to somebody else. But you can definitely save it in its native format, and you can actually come back and reopen that file in the Toyota software if you have a license for the software. And that's the way I would prefer to view it, just because, as I said, it's a lot more user-friendly the way they've got it set up. But you can certainly look at it either way.
Okay, and like questions we also get with EDR data, can the Techstream software, using that, can you alter or manipulate or change what you call a native, the raw data? Can you make any changes to that using the software?
No, you can't. And the other thing to keep in mind is that data, we have no ability to erase that data from the airbag control module either. That data, once it's stored in there, the only way it goes away is if it's overwritten by a newer event. Depending on the format, they overwrite eventually, but it stores so many of each event type, and then it will eventually start overwriting the older ones. But so we have no ability to change that. Obviously, if you export it into a CSV, you could certainly edit that, but the actual raw data that you would get in the Techstream format, I haven't heard of or seen of any way to change that, or to change what's in the airbag control module either.
And so does Techstream have access to the event data recorder, the crash data that you get with the Bosch tool? Basically, could you create a comparable report using Techstream to the CDR report with crash data?
The short answer is no. You can't actually get the data that's recorded by the EDR or the traditional data that we get with the Bosch tool or with the Bosch software. Techstream does not collect that.
Okay, David, so where does one get the Techstream software? How do you get Techstream?
You can go, you'll see the flyer up on the screen that shows just some contact. It's basically through Snap-on, but it literally is a website that, again, that'll be up on the screen. So you can see the website link to go there. You go to the website, you can actually download it onto your own computer. If you have a CDR 900, you can use that as your interface to actually connect to the car through the DLC, connect your computer. So it's Techstream Lite is basically what you're after. You can get a 1-year or a 2-day license. The 1-year license is about the same as CDR software. It's been running about $12.50 a year, $1,250, not $12.50. And then the 2-day license is $65. And I generally use the 2-day unless I'm got a lot of these in a row. Once you do it, you activate it, it starts the clock, it'll run for 2 days and then it shuts off. So you can get multiple 2 days in a row, so you can actually get it for 4 or 6, or if you need it for a bunch of days. The 900 will work as an interface device. If you look at the flyer and the website, they advertise what's called a mongoose cable for Toyota connection. That's about $500 that you can buy that if you do not have a 900. And then there's also, if you do any heavy truck work at all, the Nexiq, NEXIQ, that device will also work as an interface for the Techstream through the DLC to connect the vehicle, or collect the vehicle control history data.
Okay, if you're using the CDR 900 as your interface, do you have to make any changes to any of like the CDR software and the VCI manager? Do you change any settings that's going to affect later using the CDR 900 with CDR?
No, what you have to do initially is when you go into the Techstream software, it will not know what interface you want to use. And so the CDR 900 can be, you just pick it from the menu. So whatever interface you're using when you're doing that connection, the Techstream software needs to know that. And so either if you're using a 900 or a mongoose cable or a Nexiq or whatever you're using, you can just go into that Techstream software and pick that interface. And then once you do that once, if you use the same one every time, you don't need to change anything after that. But changes specifically to the 900 software through the VCI manager or any of that, you don't have to change anything.
Okay, so you could theoretically use your CDR 900 using the Techstream software. You're done doing that, close right out of it, plug it right back into CDR, and nothing's going to change. It's going to work just fine as long as it was set up that way.
Yep, I've actually hooked up to the car, done the EDR download, and then close out of the software, open up the Techstream, and do the same download without disconnecting or powering down or anything. So everything is, it's literally just an interface is all you're using it as.
Okay. Now, I would assume that you can get the data through the DLC or the OBD port. Is the connection relatively the same? And are the principles the same as doing a Bosch CDR download? The car has to be powered up. The electrical system has to be intact to do a DLC download using Techstream. Is that all pretty much the same?
It's all the same. Yeah, you have to be able to turn the key on, power the car up, so the ignition runs so that the bus, the CAN bus will actually be active, because that's how the system communicates. But yes, it's similar to if you could do a DLC download for EDR, you can do a DLC image of the Techstream as well.
Okay, so once you've selected your interface and you're in the software and that, how do you get the data that you're looking for with the Techstream software?
Actually, once you get connected to the car, so you'll plug in, turn the key on just like you would for an EDR download. The software will connect through, if you have the right interface selected, will connect to the car. It'll populate the VIN. There'll be a few other things that you'll have to choose from just pull down menus, like if it's got a smart key, maybe some trim codes or whatever like that. But all of that should be relatively simple. Once you do that, it will pull up a screen that shows all of the modules that the vehicle might have in yellow. And because it doesn't try to establish communication with them until you tell it to. Once you've done that, you'll click on the SRS, the Supplemental Restraint System module. You click on that module. That'll open up another screen, and first thing it'll do is it'll give you if there's codes, right? So it'll flash up all the codes that are for the airbag system. And then on the left side of the screen, there'll be a radio button that says Utility. And so you'll click on that Utility button, and that will open up another screen. And in that screen, you'll actually see a list of multiple things that you can choose on the right-hand side of the screen. One of those will be vehicle control history. So you'll click on that, and you're going to go down to the bottom of the screen, and there's an arrow. Click on the arrow. It's on the right-hand side of the bottom of the screen. Click on that arrow, and then it will say, it'll go to the next screen, and then basically what it'll do is it'll calculate how long it's going to take for you to download that control history. It'll give you some amount of time for that to happen. And then once you get it started, it'll just go and it'll collect that data. The last one I did was about 10 minutes. I've had them as long as 20. Typically, it doesn't take as long as it says it's going to take, but it can. And, I think the longest I've waited is about 16 or 17 minutes for it to download everything. Once it does that, it will just pop up the screen that's got all the events stored there and show you a list of all those events. And then you can look at the events individually in the software. You should absolutely save it as soon as you do that. So there's a save button up on the top of the screen. Go to that save button, click on it so it saves it immediately. It will give you the option when you click on it to save it in its native format, which is a TSE file, or you can export it in a CSV file. Typically, I'll do both right away and put it in a place where you can find it because the software kind of buries it in one of its own directories. So save both of those things in that format, in both formats. And then if you want to, like I said, you can view it in the Toyota software. You can view it in an Excel, however you want to do that. And then when you go to close out of there, it will actually ask you if you want to save it again. And I always just save it in the native directory. So now I've got 2 copies, both of the one that I first initially saved and then the one that saves automatically when you close out. And you can go back in, even after you're disconnected from the car, with the Toyota software and reopen that file and view it in the Toyota software anytime as long as you've saved it.
Okay. And what about direct to module? Now, you say that the data that you're most interested in is contained in the airbag control module, the same airbag control module that has the EDR used by the Bosch tool. That's the module that you'd be communicating with. Is there a way to connect using Techstream direct to module?
Yes, and you can use Techstream direct to module if you have to have 2 things. You have to have the direct to module cable for the module that you're imaging.
And is that the Bosch cable that you're referring to that would match that airbag control module?
Yes, the Bosch cable. So you'll need that, and then you'll also need a cable that Brad Muir makes a version of, and I believe there's a few other people that are making them too. That cable goes in between the direct to module cable and then the DLC connector for the 900 or for whatever other device that you're using. So there's an additional cable that you need, and you apply power through that cable so that you can actually pull that data from the vehicle control history directly from the module.
Okay, so what causes the data to be saved into the system in the vehicle?
Well, basically, Toyota's got a variety of what they call triggers that will trigger an event to be stored, and so it's very similar to EDR. In the respect that it will give you information prior to the trigger and after the trigger, right? So it's continuously recording. When the trigger occurs, it snapshots what happened before and it gives you some time after. There's various things. There's an example on the screen of what the triggers look like, so what it's seeing, what the sampling cycles are, things like that. And then the next example that you'll see on the screen is a list of some of the triggers and the amount of data that's recorded before and after, and then also how many points of data are recorded, because it changes the frequency of the recording depending on the event. So not every single one is the same. So one of the triggers, for instance, is accelerator high position in mid to high speed, right? So basically you're traveling along 40 to 50 miles an hour and you dynamite the gas or dynamite the accelerator, and that potentially will store an event. Traction control, vehicle slip control, ABS, sudden braking, all these things are things that will trigger an event. But the important thing to remember is that just because it's called a trigger, it's very specific what the trigger is. And it's not the same trigger that EDR refers to as algorithm enable, right? It's a separate system, and it's actually recording it based on that trigger. So just because you have data that corresponds to your event, the trigger is not going to be the event trigger that triggered that stored the EDR data. It could be close, it could be nowhere near it, but you have to keep that in mind when you're trying to use this data for analysis, that it's going to be a completely different time that it was triggered. And so you can't look at this and say, well, the trigger means that it matches the EDR, because it may or may not.
So there's all kinds of things that are going on in the vehicle that can trigger these systems to record data. What type of information is recorded other than the typical standard EDR crash data?
Well, again, you'll see up on the screen, there's a variety of things that it records. The things that we're most interested in are things like throttle position, vehicle speed, brake pressure. You'll actually get lateral and longitudinal Gs from those accelerometers. You can get whether the cruise is off or on. You could get steering, what actually caused the trigger, right? So you'll know if it was an ABS or what it was. You'll get brake pressure, which will tell you how far the person is into the brake. So there's a lot of really good information that gets stored. It's just a matter of what stores it. And then also in the image on the screen, you can see that each trigger is given an ID number. So those ID numbers are laid out as far as vehicle speed, which triggers will give you speed, because not every trigger will give you the same information. But a lot of times, for instance, in a crash situation, a lot of times the trigger that I'm interested in will be a sudden braking or a vehicle slip control or a collision avoidance system that activates. And when that system activated, you'll actually see information, so it should store this information. And you know if that system activated, it's doing collision avoidance. And again, to reiterate, that trigger that triggered the collision avoidance could be happen at a different point in time than algorithm enable. And it most likely did, because the avoidance hopefully is before the crash. But there's good information that it can tell you about what was going on prior to the crash, even prior to the 5 seconds before that we get from EDR.
All right, so you mentioned all these different triggers that trigger all this different information being collected that may or may not be related to the event as stored in the event data recorder. How are you able to differentiate when that trigger occurred in a relationship to an event?
There's a few different ways. If the vehicle is equipped with a navigation system, you will have a time and date stamp for when the particular trigger occurred. So if you know the time and date of your crash, that makes it relatively simple. If you do not have a navigation system, unfortunately, you will not have that time and date stamp. And the other important thing is that you may have ignition cycles, but these vehicles have more than one cycle counter. And so the cycle counts in your data may not match the cycle counts in your EDR data. And that doesn't mean that it's not related. It just means that there's two different cycle counters for some reason that they're using in that. So what you would need to do at that point is you need to look at things like the vehicle speed and look at what type of event. And if you know the person, for instance, hit the brakes right before the crash or swerved, then you can potentially relate that. The other thing is if the vehicle's totaled, you'll know that what's going to be one of the last events. If there's an event that's related, it's going to be one of the last events that's stored. Also, many times you could get mileage. And so if you have mileage on the vehicle, you also may be able to correlate that to your crash. So there's multiple things that you potentially could do. The big thing is that the data should match the circumstances of the crash, right? I mean, that's what this is just another tool. And if you can coordinate this from speeds or from something to say it's related to your crash, then definitely use it. If you absolutely can't tell for sure because you just don't have the information, then I would say it's possible that it's related, but it may or may not be. So it's just a matter of that's where the analyst part of this comes in, right? You have to use this as an analysis tool and see if you can correlate this somehow to the circumstances of your crash.
Okay, so we've talked about some of this additional information that you can get using Techstream and the vehicle control history. How do you use it? What purpose does it serve, or what in addition to crash data, what is this going to do for me?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, number one is if you do get crash data, then you can use this as an additional, to confirm what you're seeing in the crash data. More importantly, if you do not get crash data, so if you have a pedestrian strike or a car hits a cyclist or something else, for some reason the EDR does not trigger and doesn't record, Now I can go back and, if the driver or a witness or something said, yeah, they, driving their 2019 Lexus and they dynamited the brakes before they smacked the pedestrian. Well, I didn't get EDR, but I could tell you potentially how fast they were going when they hit the brakes. You might be able to figure out when the impact happened depending on what data it collected. So in those situations with pedestrian strikes or with hitting cyclists like bicycles, it's very useful because you potentially actually have information about what the driver, what the vehicle actions of the vehicle were, or what the actions the driver took prior to the crash, and more importantly, what their behavior was. In another situation, if you have a driver that you need to establish some kind of a pattern of behavior prior to the EDR. So, somebody says, well, that person was flying up to the light and dynamiting the brakes at every light and tearing out of there every time the light turned green, all the way back up the street, and then they finally hit somebody. Well, now I can go back and I can prove that. Because if they're dynamiting the brakes and slamming on the gas, every time they do that, it's going to give me an event. And I will know, based on if it's on the same key cycle or if we have time and date when those events happened. Potentially I go back and map where they were, things like that. So, I mean, it's a lot more than we basically get a 5-second snapshot of pre-crash at this point with EDR. With this record data, you can actually get a lot more information if you don't get EDR.
Well, David, do you have some examples of some cases that you've worked where the data that you've obtained from the vehicle control history using Techstream has been beneficial and really helped out your case?
Yeah, and we actually have had several. And one particular case, I had a Chrysler 200 and a Toyota RAV4 that were involved in a crash in an intersection. Of course, both drivers said they had a green light. The RAV4, I was able to get control history from that as well as EDR, and the 200 also had EDR. And so when I looked at the EDR data, it was pretty much not clear. I mean, the RAV4 was going significantly faster when the crash happened, but beyond that, and the crash happened when we knew where it happened in the intersection. But beyond that, it wasn't really, obviously it doesn't tell you who had the green light. But interestingly, once we pulled down the vehicle control history data from the RAV4 and looked at that, I was able to go back and look at her history prior to the actual intersection crash. And it was pretty clear that she had been driving lead footing it to every light, slam on the brakes, and then taken off at high speed from the next light, the whole street where she came up on this. And so there was about 3 or 4 incidents of that. The street that she came up on this was, the speed limit was 30. And she was getting up to between 40 and 50 miles an hour between each light before dynamiting the brakes again. And so we knew that she'd been driving relatively recklessly based on looking at that, just coming up into this intersection, just because of the speeds and the accelerations. And then we went back and I took the EDR data from the Chrysler 200 and did a time distance study to figure out how long it would have taken the driver to get from the stop bar to where the crash happened. And when I did the analysis, basically he accelerated from 0 at the stop bar up to the point of the crash. And literally I think it was 70 feet, and I came up with like 68 feet for him to get to that point if he had started from 0. And he was going roughly 18 miles an hour by the time he got hit, and she hit him at close to 40. So from that, we were able to determine a couple of things. Number one, that his story was consistent with leaving from a green light, or leaving at a green light from a stopped position. And her, based on his data and seeing that, we came up with the conclusion that that light had probably been green for him for about 4 seconds before she entered the intersection and hit him. So we were able to establish that just because we knew how she'd been driving, and also witness testimony as to how she'd been driving, and that she was kind of whipping around people coming up to this intersection. So that was one example. And then in another one, I had a crash between a motorcycle and a Toyota Corolla. And the Corolla driver claimed that she came to a stop at a stop sign, at a four-way stop, and then pulled forward and then was struck on the side of the car by the motorcycle. And so, but when we went back and looked at it, she had not stopped. She had rolled the intersection probably at about 14 or I think 14 miles an hour. She'd actually rolled through the intersection. The motorcyclist didn't stop either. So they both basically went through went through the stop sign and collided. But her statement was she'd come to a complete stop, looked both ways, and then rolled forward and was hit. And that we were able to dispute that based on that information. So that's a couple of ones that I've had. But there was an article, we published an article in Collision. The link for that article or the reference for that article will be at the end of the video, that shows a variety of case studies, some of which are mine, some which were some other contributors to the article, that basically show when it was useful and how we used it. And since that, I've used it multiple other times as well, just for various comparisons or for establishing. In one case, I did it to establish that it was the damage to the vehicle was fraud, just because you could see how they'd been driving it, because there was damage on 3 sides of the vehicle that they were claiming happened in one crash. And we were able to dispute that through basically the behavior of the operator prior to that, and the fact that they clearly had been driving at high speed in reverse and forwards, and hitting things, sideswiping things, or running into things repeatedly in that time prior to the event data.
Excellent. It sounds like there's really a lot of great information, and it's a great tool to be used, put in your toolbox with all the other things that you have to investigate a car crash sequence. If someone's going to start using Techstream and they're getting into this, do you have any advice for them? Obviously it's different, and that any advice or kind of warnings or caveats that you would recommend to people that are going to be looking into using Techstream?
Well, a few things. I mean, one, as I mentioned before, you just have to think about when that trigger occurs and know that trigger is not going to match the trigger in your EDR data if you have EDR data. So it's not going to be the same trigger. We also mentioned before the ignition cycles will not match. So if you're going to try to match it, you either have to do it through the behavior of the car, speed-wise, things like that, or potentially you could do it through mileage if that's tracked in the events you're looking at. So the big thing is just being very careful with how you're using it and look at it like what it is. It's just another tool for your toolbox. It's not going to tell you exactly what happened during the crash based on the trigger. The way it's going to do it is that you have to interpret that data based on the circumstances of your crash. It is easy to get the data. It really doesn't take that much to do the downloads and to get your hands on it, but the analysis and the using it is much more tricky, just because it's not a crash trigger. And I've said that multiple times, and the reason for that is I've seen it misused by people that say, well, this trigger and this trigger match, but how come my speeds are different? Or how come you've got an event that just doesn't seem to make sense with your EDR or with the circumstances of your crash? Well, chances are that event is not from the crash you're looking at. And where we tend to run into the biggest issues with this is, a lot of times when we get to look at a vehicle or do an EDR image or whatever, I mean, that crash may have happened 2 years ago and the car's been driven since then. And so either A, your event won't be there, or B, you may not be able to coordinate or connect that data to your event unless you have a time and date stamp and you know the time and date that your event happened. So it's just looking at it for what it is. For those who do heavy truck downloads, this data is a lot more similar to heavy truck in the respect that it takes a lot more interpretation to make sure that you're using it properly. As we're not using it for what it was intended to be used for, right? Toyota did this to protect themselves, I believe, from unintended acceleration claims and things like that, where the data that we get for EDR, that really wasn't intended for what we're using it for either, but it's much more user friendly because we've been using it for years, where this is relatively new, and it's just going to take more interpretation and a lot more care when you're trying to use it.
Excellent. Well, David, thank you so much. I think we've probably scratched the surface on Techstream and the type of information that you can get from those different systems. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate it. And thanks again for sharing what you know about Techstream.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. We barely scratched the surface. We could spend hours talking about analysis of the data.
And that's it for this edition of EDR Tech. Again, a big thank you to David for being part of this month's edition. In the description section below, we've listed links to all the Collision Magazine articles related to Techstream, including David's, along with links to where to obtain the Techstream software, specialized connection hardware, and other useful information. As a disclaimer, we mentioned in this edition that the Bosch CDR900 is a compatible interface with Techstream. Bosch is aware of this and has no issues with it. However, Bosch does not develop anything around the CDR900 to support the Techstream connection and does not provide technical support on Techstream. If there's a topic you'd like to see on a future edition of EDR Tech, please let us know. And if you haven't yet, click on the subscribe button to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll be notified when next month's edition has been posted. And as always, if you have any questions about any of the EDR retrieval tools, Bosch, Hyundai, Kia, or Tesla, just give us a call or go to crashdatagroup.com.